Picture this. You're 30,000 feet in the air, trapped in a metal tube with nowhere to escape, when suddenly a baby's piercing cries fill the cabin. The tension is thick. Passengers are shifting uncomfortably, and everyone's looking around. With that mixture of sympathy and frustration we've all felt. But what happens next will restore your faith in human kindness and show you how one moment of compassion can completely transform two lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the extraordinary true story of David Chen, a struggling, single father of twin boys, whose simple act of kindness toward a distressed mother and her crying infant on a cross-country flight led to an encounter that would change everything he thought he knew about fate, fortune, and the power of genuine human connection. What David didn't know, as he gently rocked that stranger's baby to sleep, was that the grateful mother sitting beside him controlled one of the largest oil empires in North America, and his spontaneous act of help was about to unlock opportunities beyond his wildest imagination. If you've ever wondered whether kindness really does come back to you, or if you felt invisible in a world that seems to only notice wealth and status, this story will remind you that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't money or influence, but simply the willingness to help another human being when they need it most. Now let's begin this incredible journey, starting with a Tuesday morning that began like any other but ended with David Chen questioning everything he thought he knew about luck, destiny, and second chances. The alarm clock's shrill beeping cut through the early morning darkness of David Chen's cramped one-bedroom apartment, jolting him from the few precious hours of sleep he'd managed to steal. The red digits glowed mockingly at him. 4:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, he'd need to wake his twin boys, get them dressed, fed, and ready for another long day that would test every ounce of strength he had left. David rolled out of bed, his body protesting every movement. 3 years of single parenthood had aged him beyond his 32 years, carving lines around his eyes and adding gray streaks to his black hair. The construction job that barely kept them afloat demanded 12-hour days of backbreaking labor, but it was honest work, and it was all he had. The small apartment told the story of a man doing his absolute best with very little. The living room doubled as David's bedroom, his mattress folded against the wall each morning to make space for the boys to play. The kitchen consisted of a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a card table that served as both dining room and homework station. Despite the cramped conditions, everything was spotlessly clean and organized with military precision. David had learned early that chaos in their environment would only add to the chaos in their hearts. From the bedroom came the sound of stirring, and David smiled despite his exhaustion. 8-year-old Marcus was always the first to wake, his internal clock as reliable as any alarm. Sure enough, within moments, his eldest son appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up at impossible angles, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Dad," Marcus whispered, mindful not to wake his younger brother. At 8, Marcus had already developed the careful awareness of a child who understood that every dollar mattered and every burden shared made things easier for everyone. "Morning, buddy," David replied, pulling his son into a quick hug. "Ready for the big day?" Today wasn't just any Tuesday. Today was the day David would fly across the country for the most important job interview of his life. Jameson Construction, based in Seattle, had offered him a position as a site supervisor, a role that would nearly double his current salary and provide the kind of stability his boys desperately needed. The catch was that the company needed an answer within 48 hours, which meant David had exactly 1 day to fly there, interview, and fly back. The trip would cost him nearly 2 weeks' worth of grocery money, but David had calculated every angle If he got the job, they could move to Seattle within a month. The boys could have their own rooms. David could finally afford decent health care, and maybe, just maybe, they could start building the kind of life he'd always dreamed of giving them. 6-year-old Tyler emerged from the bedroom moments later, dragging his stuffed elephant behind him. Where Marcus was serious and thoughtful, Tyler was pure sunshine, greeting each day with enthusiasm that never failed to lift David's spirits. "Is today the day you go on the airplane, Daddy?" Tyler asked, climbing onto David's lap as he sat at the card table with his coffee. "That's right, little man. Just for today, and then I'll be back tomorrow morning." Tyler's face scrunched with concern. But what if the airplane gets lost? David's heart clenched. Since losing their mother in a car accident 2 years ago, both boys struggled with anxiety whenever David had to travel for work, even locally. The thought of him being unreachable thousands of miles away was particularly troubling for Tyler. "Airplanes don't get lost, Ty," Marcus said with the authority of an older brother. "They have computers and radar and stuff. Dad's going to be fine." David marveled at how Marcus had stepped into a protective role with his younger brother, showing maturity far beyond his years. It broke David's heart that his boys had been forced to grow up so quickly, but it also filled him with fierce pride. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would watch the boys while David was gone. The elderly woman had become their unofficial grandmother, stepping in to help whenever David's work schedule demanded it. She refused to accept payment, insisting that helping children was simply what neighbors did for each other. David had learned to accept her kindness gracefully, though he always found small ways to repay her generosity. As David helped the boys get dressed and ready for school, he went over the day's schedule one more time. Mrs. Rodriguez would pick them up after school, help with homework, and make sure they had dinner. David's flight would land at 6 a.m. Pacific time, giving him several hours to prepare for his 2 p.m. interview with Jameson Construction's executive team. "Remember," David said as he knelt down to tie Tyler's shoes, "I need you both to be extra good for Mrs. Rodriguez today. Can you do that for me?" Both boys nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the day without fully grasping what it might mean for their future. The bus ride to the airport was David's first moment of quiet reflection. As Chicago's skyline faded behind him, he allowed himself to imagine what life might look like if everything went according to plan. A real apartment with separate bedrooms, the ability to buy name-brand cereal instead of generic. Maybe even family vacations, something they'd never been able to afford. But David also tried to prepare himself for disappointment. He'd learned not to count on anything until it was absolutely certain. Life had taught him that hope, while necessary, needed to be tempered with realism. At O'Hare Airport, David felt distinctly out of place among the business travelers in their expensive suits and confident strides. His own outfit, carefully selected from his limited wardrobe, was clean and pressed, but obviously budget-conscious. He carried a small duffel bag containing a change of clothes and his interview materials, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. The security line moved slowly, giving David time to review his prepared answers to likely interview questions. He'd spent weeks researching Jameson Construction, memorizing their project history and company values. This wasn't just about getting a job. It was about proving he could provide the kind of opportunities his boys deserved. Flight 847 to Seattle was already boarding when David reached his gate. He'd purchased the cheapest ticket available, which meant a middle seat near the back of the plane. As he made his way down the narrow aisle, David noticed the stark contrast between first class, with its spacious seats and attentive service, and the cramped quarters where he'd spend the next 4 hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His assigned seat was between a businessman who immediately claimed both armrests and a young woman holding an infant who appeared to be only a few months old. The woman looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the frazzled appearance of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Excuse me," David said politely as he squeezed into his seat. The businessman barely acknowledged him, while the young woman offered a tired smile. "Sorry about the space," she said, adjusting her position to make room. "Flying with a baby isn't exactly ideal." "No worries at all," David replied, settling in. "I've been there. Twin boys. I remember those days." The woman's eyes widened, with a mixture of respect and sympathy. "Twins? I can barely handle one. How did you survive?" David chuckled. "Lots of coffee and very little sleep. But they get easier, I promise." As the plane prepared for takeoff, David noticed the woman's growing anxiety. She clutched her baby tighter, whispering soft reassurances that seemed meant as much for herself as for the child. The infant, perhaps sensing his mother's tension, began to fuss. "First flight?" David asked gently. The woman nodded. "For both of us. I'm terrified something will go wrong and everyone will hate us if he starts crying." "Trust me," David said. "Anyone who judges a parent for a crying baby has never been responsible for a child themselves. You're doing fine." The plane's engines roared to life, and as they began taxiing toward the runway, the infant's fussing escalated into full-blown crying. The piercing sound filled the cabin, and David could feel the collective tension of nearby passengers rising. The businessman beside him muttered something under his breath and put on noise-canceling headphones. The young mother's face flushed with embarrassment as she tried everything she could think of to calm her baby. She rocked him gently, offered a pacifier he promptly rejected, and whispered soothing words that had no effect on his distress. With each passing moment, her anxiety grew more visible, and the baby's cries became more intense. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to David, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't know what to do. He was fine this morning." David recognized the panic in her voice, the helpless desperation of a parent whose child is inconsolable. He'd experienced those moments countless times with his own boys, particularly during their colicky phase as infants. "Hey," he said softly, "it's okay. Sometimes babies just need a different person to hold them. Would you like me to try?" The woman hesitated, clearly torn between embarrassment and desperation. Around them, David could sense the growing irritation of passengers who were already dreading the next 4 hours of crying. "You don't have to," she said, though her voice carried a note of hope. "I'd like to help," David replied simply, "if you're comfortable with it." With visible relief, the woman carefully transferred her son to David's arms. The baby was tiny, probably no more than 3 months old, with a shock of dark hair and the red, scrunched face of an infant in full protest mode. David positioned the baby against his chest, supporting his head with practiced ease. He began a gentle swaying motion, the kind of rhythmic movement he'd perfected during countless nights walking the floors of their apartment when his own boys were this age. "Sometimes they just need to feel secure," David murmured, as much to the mother as to the baby, "and sometimes they pick up on our anxiety and mirror it back to us." He began humming softly, a wordless melody that had always seemed to work. Magic on Marcus and Tyler. The tune was nothing special, just a simple pattern of notes that seemed to resonate with something primal in young children. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the baby's cries began to soften. His tiny fists, which had been clenched in distress, slowly relaxed. David continued the gentle swaying and humming, occasionally adjusting his position to find what worked best for this particular child. The businessman beside him lowered his headphones, looking genuinely surprised. "How did you do that?" "Practice," David replied quietly, still focused on the settling infant. "Lots and lots of practice." Within 10 minutes, the baby was completely calm, his breathing deep and regular against David's chest. The relief in the cabin was almost palpable as passengers returned their attention to books, laptops, and conversations that had been interrupted by the crying. But David barely noticed the change in atmosphere around him. He was completely absorbed in the peaceful weight of the baby in his arms, remembering with sudden clarity those early days with his own sons. Despite the exhaustion and stress of single parenthood, there had been moments of pure magic when he'd successfully soothed a crying child and felt the incredible bond between parent and baby. "I can't believe you did that," the young woman said, her voice filled with gratitude and amazement. "I was starting to panic. I thought we'd have to get off the plane." "You were doing everything right," David assured her. "Sometimes babies just need a change of scenery, or in this case, a change of arms. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong." The woman introduced herself as Isabella Santos, and David learned that she was 26 years old, traveling alone with her infant, Son Gabriel, for the first time. She was flying to Seattle to visit her sister, who had just had a baby of her own. "I've been dreading this trip for weeks," Isabella admitted. "Everyone said flying with a baby would be a nightmare, and when he started crying during takeoff, I thought they were right." "The first trip is always the scariest," David replied, gently stroking Gabriel's back as the baby dozed peacefully. "But you'll figure out what works for you both. Every parent does." As the flight continued, David found himself in an easy conversation with Isabella. She asked about his experience with twins, marveling at the logistics of managing two infants simultaneously. David shared stories of those early days, both the challenges and the unexpected joys. "You make it sound almost manageable," Isabella said with a laugh. "Though I suspect you're being kind about how difficult it really was." "It was difficult," David admitted, "especially after my wife passed away. There were days I wondered if I was strong enough to do it alone. But you find reserves you didn't know you had when someone depends on you completely." Isabella's expression grew serious. "I'm sorry about your wife. That must have been incredibly hard." David nodded, his throat tightening slightly. Even 2 years later, talking about Sarah's death wasn't easy. "It was. But the boys needed me to keep going, so I did. You do what you have to do." "Where are you traveling to?" Isabella asked, perhaps sensing David's need to change the subject. "Job interview in Seattle," David replied. "Potentially a life-changing opportunity if I don't mess it up." "What kind of work do you do?" "Construction. I've been doing manual labor for years, but this position is in management. It would mean better pay, better benefits, a chance to actually provide for my boys the way they deserve." Isabella studied his face as he spoke, noting the way his expression softened when he mentioned his children. "They're lucky to have you," she said simply. "I'm the lucky one," David replied. "They keep me grounded, give me purpose. Everything I do is for them." As Gabriel continued sleeping peacefully in David's arms, other passengers began to take notice. The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, stopped by their row during the beverage service. "I've been flying for 22 years, she said quietly, "and I've never seen anyone calm a crying baby that quickly. You've got a gift." David smiled modestly. "Just experience. I've had plenty of practice with my own kids." "Well, whatever. You did. The whole cabin is grateful," Patricia replied, "including me. Would you like anything to drink? It's on the house." As word spread subtly through the cabin about David's intervention, he began receiving grateful nods and smiles from nearby passengers. A woman across the aisle mouthed, "Thank you," while an elderly man gave him an approving thumbs up. But David was largely oblivious to the attention. His focus remained on Gabriel, who had settled into such a deep sleep that his tiny features were completely relaxed. There was something profoundly peaceful about holding a sleeping baby, something that transported David back to those quiet moments when his own boys were small and the world felt manageable. "He really trusts you," Isabella observed, watching her son's peaceful expression. "He's never slept this well for a stranger before." "Babies are good judges of character," David replied softly. "They respond to genuine care and attention. He can sense that you love him, and now he feels safe enough to rest." "I hope you're right about me being a good mother," Isabella said, voicing the doubt that plagued so many new parents. "Sometimes I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us do when we start," David assured her. "Parenting isn't something you master, it's something you grow into day by day. The fact that you care enough to worry about doing it right means you're already on the right track." As the flight progressed, David learned more about Isabella's life. She had moved to Los Angeles 6 months ago for work, leaving behind her extended family in Texas. Gabriel's father wasn't in the picture, making her journey into motherhood remarkably similar to David's experience with single parenthood. "Do you ever wonder if you're enough?" Isabella asked quietly. "If one parent can really provide everything a child needs?" David considered the question carefully. It was something he'd wrestled with constantly, especially in those early days after Sarah's death, when everything felt overwhelming. "I think," he said slowly, "that children need love, stability, and consistency more than they need two parents. If you can provide those things, you're giving them what matters most. The rest, you figure out as you go." "How do you handle the loneliness?" Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper, and David sensed she was asking something she'd never voiced before. "You make connections where you can find them," David replied honestly. "Neighbors, other parents, teachers, community groups. It takes effort, but you build a support network that becomes your extended family, and you remember that feeling lonely doesn't mean you're alone." The conversation was interrupted by turbulence that caused the plane to shudder and drop suddenly. Several passengers gasped, and Gabriel stirred in David's arms but didn't wake. Isabella gripped her armrest, her face pale with anxiety. "It's okay," David said calmly. "Just a little rough air. The pilots know what they're doing." His calm presence seemed to steady Isabella, and she relaxed slightly as the turbulence passed. "You're very reassuring," she said. "Your boys are lucky to have someone so steady in their lives." "I try to be," David replied. "But honestly, they're the ones who keep me steady. When you're responsible for someone else's well-being, you find strength you didn't know you had." As they began their descent into Seattle, Gabriel finally woke, stretching and yawning like a tiny cat. He looked up at David with wide, curious eyes, showing no distress at finding himself in unfamiliar arms. "Hello there, little man," David said softly, adjusting his position to support the baby's head. "Did you have a good nap?" Gabriel made a soft, cooing sound, and David couldn't help but smile. There was something magical about those early interactions with babies, when they were just beginning to discover the world around them. "He likes you," Isabella said, reaching over to stroke her son's cheek. "He's usually shy with strangers." "Babies know good people," David replied, though he felt a pang of sadness as he prepared to return Gabriel to his mother. Holding the infant had brought back a flood of memories from his own boy's early days, reminding him of moments of pure joy amidst the chaos of new parenthood. As the plane touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, David carefully transferred Gabriel back to Isabella's arms. The baby protested briefly at the change, but quickly settled against his mother's familiar warmth. "I can't thank you enough," Isabella said as they prepared to disembark. "You saved our entire trip." "It was my pleasure," David replied sincerely. "Gabriel's a sweet baby. You're doing a great job with him." As passengers began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave the plane, David noticed that Isabella seemed hesitant, as if she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how to express it. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Isabella took a business card from her purse and held it out to him. "I know this might seem strange, but would you mind if I kept in touch? As a friend, I mean. It would be nice to know someone else who understands the challenges of single parenthood." David took the card, noting the elegant design and quality paper. The information was simple: Isabella Santos, with a phone number and email address. No company name or title, which struck him as unusual but not worth questioning. "I'd like that," David said, pulling out his own wallet to find one of his business cards. His were far simpler, printed on basic cardstock. David Chen, construction worker, followed by his contact information. "Construction," Isabella noted, studying the card. "That explains the steady hands and calm demeanor. You're used to working in high-pressure situations." "Something like that," David agreed. "Though I have to say, managing a construction site is sometimes easier than managing twin 8-year-olds. Isabella laughed, the first genuinely relaxed sound he'd heard from her all flight. "I believe that completely." As they made their way through the jet bridge and into the terminal, David felt an unexpected reluctance to part ways. The conversation with Isabella had been one of the most genuine interactions he'd had with another adult in months. Between work and parenting responsibilities, he rarely had time for meaningful connections with people his own age. "Good luck with your interview," Isabella said as they reached the main terminal, where their paths would naturally diverge. "Thank you. And good luck with your visit to your sister. I'm sure Gabriel will be a perfect angel for the rest of your trip." "I hope so." "And David?" Isabella paused, shifting Gabriel to one arm so she could touch David's shoulder briefly. "Your boys are incredibly lucky to have you. Don't ever doubt that." The words hit David more powerfully than he'd expected. In the constant struggle to provide for his children and be everything they needed, he rarely paused to consider whether he was actually succeeding. Hearing that reassurance from someone who had just witnessed him in action meant more than Isabella could possibly know. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." As David watched Isabella disappear into the crowd with Gabriel, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. The encounter had reminded him of the person he was beyond his roles. As worker and father, someone capable of making a difference in a stranger's life through simple kindness and genuine care. With his interview still hours away, David made his way through the airport toward the rental car counter, his mind already shifting to the challenge ahead. But the memory of Gabriel's peaceful sleep and Isabella's grateful smile stayed with him, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life were the unexpected ones, when you had the chance to help another human being and discovered something valuable about yourself in the process. The job interview that had brought him across the country suddenly felt less daunting. If he could calm a stranger's crying baby and provide comfort to a frightened new mother, perhaps he was more capable than he'd given himself credit for. Perhaps he was ready for whatever came next. David's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted, his tie for the third time, standing in the bathroom mirror of the modest hotel near Seattle's airport. The interview at Jameson Construction had gone better than he dared to hope. The executives had been impressed with his practical experience and his innovative solutions to common construction challenges. They'd promised a decision within 48 hours, and David allowed himself to feel cautiously optimistic as he prepared for his red-eye flight back to Chicago. The day had been a whirlwind of presentations, site visits, and intensive questioning. David had drawn on every ounce of knowledge he'd accumulated over years of hands-on construction work, and for the first time in months, he'd felt truly confident in his abilities. The salary they'd discussed would change everything for him and the boys. Real healthcare, a decent apartment, maybe even the possibility of saving for their college educations. As he made his way back to the airport, David found himself thinking about the morning's flight and his encounter with Isabella and baby Gabriel. The memory of holding the peaceful infant had stayed with him throughout the day, a reminder of the gentler aspects of his nature that often got buried under the daily grind of survival. He wondered how their visit with Isabella's sister was going and whether Gabriel had remained the perfect traveler he'd become after David's intervention. The departure gate was less crowded for the late-night flight, filled mostly with business travelers eager to return home and a few tourists wrapping up Seattle vacations. David found a seat near the boarding area and pulled out his phone to text Mrs. Rodriguez, letting her know his flight was on time and he'd be home by morning to get the boys ready for school. His phone buzzed with a response almost immediately. The boys had been perfect angels, she wrote, though Tyler had asked at least 6 times when Daddy would be home. Marcus had helped with dinner and made sure his younger brother finished his homework. David smiled, feeling that familiar surge of pride and love for his sons. They were growing into remarkable young men, despite the challenges they'd faced. As passengers began boarding the aircraft, David noticed a familiar figure in the gate area. Isabella sat near the window, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his carrier beside her. She looked more relaxed than she had that morning, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and her clothes more casual. When their eyes met across the waiting area, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "David," she called softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. "What a wonderful coincidence." David gathered his bag and made his way over to her seat. "How did the visit go?" "Gabriel looks like he's getting used to the traveling life." Isabella laughed quietly. "He's been an absolute angel all day. I think you worked some kind of magic on him this morning." My sister couldn't believe how calm and content he was during our entire visit. "I'm glad to hear it. Sometimes babies just need that initial adjustment period to feel secure in new situations." "Are you on the same flight back?" Isabella asked, checking her boarding pass. "I upgraded to first class for this leg. I figured after this morning's stress, we both deserved a little extra comfort." David glanced at his own economy ticket, slightly embarrassed by the contrast. "Same flight, different section. How did the job interview go?" "The interview?" Isabella looked confused for a moment before remembering their morning conversation. "Oh yes, you mentioned that. How did it go?" "Better than I expected, actually. I should know something in the next day or two." David shifted his bag to his other shoulder, preparing to head toward his boarding group. "I should probably get in line. Economy passengers don't get the luxury of priority boarding." Isabella stood up suddenly, her expression thoughtful. "David, this might sound strange, but would you consider sitting with Gabriel and me in first class? I could change your seat. After this morning, I'd feel more comfortable having someone nearby who knows how to handle baby emergencies." David hesitated, uncertain about accepting such an expensive gesture from someone he'd only just met. "That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to do that. The upgrade cost alone would be more than I paid for my entire ticket." "You're not asking," Isabella replied firmly. "I'm offering, and honestly, it would be doing me a favor. Gabriel clearly responds well to you, and I'd rather have backup than spend the next 4 hours worrying about another meltdown." Before David could protest further, Isabella had approached the gate agent and was engaged in a quiet conversation that involved gesturing toward David and some discreet handling of what appeared to be a credit card. Within minutes, she returned with a new boarding pass. "It's done," she said, handing him the upgraded ticket. "Consider it a small thank you for this morning's rescue mission." David stared at the first-class boarding pass in disbelief. In all his years of flying, which admittedly weren't many, he'd never experienced anything beyond basic economy seating. The gesture was so unexpected and generous that he found himself momentarily speechless. "Isabella, this is too much. You don't even know me." "I know enough," she replied with a smile. "I know you're a single father doing his best to provide for his children. I know you didn't hesitate to help a stranger in distress. I know you have a gentle touch and a kind heart. That's more than I know about most people in my life." As they boarded the aircraft, David marveled at the difference between first-class and economy accommodations. The seats were spacious leather recliners with plenty of room to stretch out. Each passenger had ample storage space, personal entertainment systems, and enough room to move around comfortably. The flight attendants greeted passengers by name and offered welcome beverages before takeoff. Isabella settled Gabriel's carrier in the space beside her seat, while David took the window seat across the aisle. The baby was still sleeping soundly, his tiny features peaceful in the dim cabin lighting. "I have to admit," David said as they prepared for takeoff, "this is definitely more comfortable than my usual flying experience." "What's your usual flying experience like?" Isabella asked, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. David declined the alcohol, opting for water instead. Cramped middle seats, fighting for armrest space, hoping the person in front of me doesn't recline their seat all the way back. "This feels like a different world." "It is a different world," Isabella said quietly, and David caught something wistful in her tone. "Sometimes I forget what it's like to worry about things like seat assignments and baggage fees." "Must be nice to have that kind of flexibility," David replied, though without any bitterness. He was genuinely curious about Isabella's circumstances. Her clothes were elegant but understated, her manner confident but not arrogant. She clearly had means, but she didn't carry herself with the entitled attitude he might have expected from someone who could casually upgrade a stranger's airline seat. "It has its advantages," Isabella admitted, "but it also has its complications. Money can solve certain problems, but it creates others. It becomes difficult to know who's genuinely interested in you as a person versus what you might be able to provide for them." David considered this perspective, something he'd never had reason to contemplate before. His own financial struggles meant that most of his relationships were based on mutual support and genuine connection. The idea that wealth might actually complicate human relationships was a novel concept. "That must make it hard to trust people," he said. "Exactly," Isabella replied, looking surprised that he'd understood so quickly. "Which is why this morning meant so much to me. You helped Gabriel and me without knowing anything about my background or circumstances. Your kindness was completely genuine." As the plane reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began preparing dinner service. David watched in amazement as real china and glassware appeared, along with cloth napkins and multiple courses presented on actual plates rather than in plastic containers. "Is this how you always travel?" he asked, still somewhat overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding them. Isabella paused before answering, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I travel frequently for work, so yes, this is pretty standard for me." "What about you? Do you travel much for construction work?" "Not really. This was actually my first business trip, if you can call it that. Most of my work is local, within driving distance of home. I can't afford to be away from the boys very often, and travel expenses aren't really in our budget." "Tell me more about your boys," Isabella said, settling back in her seat with genuine interest. "Marcus and Tyler, right? Twins." David's face lit up as it always did when talking about his children. "They're 8 years old, but they couldn't be more different. Marcus is serious and thoughtful, always trying to take care of everyone around him. He's incredibly responsible for his age, sometimes too responsible. Tyler is pure joy, sees the best in everything and everyone. He can find something to laugh about in any situation." They sound wonderful. How do they handle you being away, even for short trips like this? It's hard on them, David admitted. Since losing their mother, they get anxious when I'm not around. Marcus tries to hide it, but Tyler is more open about his worries. They've both had to grow up faster than I would have liked. Isabella nodded understandingly. Single parenthood is challenging under any circumstances. How long has it been since your wife passed? 2 years last month. Car accident on her way home from work. The boys were 6 when it happened, old enough to understand that mommy wasn't coming home, but too young to really comprehend the permanence of it. I'm so sorry, Isabella said softly. That must have been devastating for all of you. David was quiet for a moment, remembering those dark early days when he'd wondered how he would possibly manage alone. The hardest part wasn't just losing Sarah, though that was unbearable. It was suddenly being responsible for everything. I'd always been an involved father, but Sarah handled so many of the daily details: school communications, doctor appointments, social arrangements, emotional support. I had to learn how to be everything they needed while dealing with my own grief. How did you manage? Honestly, I'm not sure I did manage, at least not at first. There were days I felt like I was drowning. But the boys needed me to keep going, so I figured it out day by day. Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor, became our saving grace. She stepped in to help without being asked, treated the boys like her own grandchildren. Isabella listened intently, her expression reflecting genuine empathy rather than mere politeness. It sounds like you've built a real community around your family. We've been lucky that way. Our apartment building is full of families, lots of kids for the boys to play with. Everyone looks out for everyone else. It's not fancy, but it's home. The dinner service interrupted their conversation, and David found himself presented with choices he'd never encountered on an airplane before. Herb-crusted salmon or filet mignon, multiple side dishes, fresh salad, and dessert options that looked like they belonged in an upscale restaurant. This is incredible, he murmured as the flight attendant explained each course. Isabella smiled at his obvious amazement. The food really is significantly better up here. It's one of the genuine advantages of first-class travel. As they ate, their conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. Isabella asked thoughtful questions about David's construction work, seeming genuinely interested in the technical aspects of his job and the challenges of managing complex projects. David found himself describing his work with more enthusiasm than he'd felt in months, remembering why he'd originally been drawn to construction. There's something satisfying about building something tangible, he explained between bites of perfectly prepared salmon. You start with nothing but plans and raw materials, and through skill and hard work, you create something that will last for decades. Something that people will live in, work in, find shelter in. That's a beautiful way to look at it, Isabella replied. I've never thought about construction work in those terms before. What kind of work do you do? David asked, realizing that despite her interest in his career, Isabella had revealed very little about her own professional life. Isabella hesitated for a moment, that same careful consideration he'd noticed earlier when personal topics arose. I work in energy, she said finally. Mostly renewable projects these days, though the company has traditional holdings as well. That must be interesting work, especially with all the changes happening in the energy sector. It is, Isabella agreed, though she seemed eager to shift the conversation away from her career. What about your boys? Do they show any interest in following in your footsteps? David laughed. Marcus is fascinated by how things work, always taking apart toys to see the mechanisms inside. Tyler is more interested in people than things. He wants to be a teacher when he grows up, says he wants to help kids learn to read. Those are wonderful aspirations. You're clearly raising thoughtful, caring children. I try. It's not always easy to know if I'm making the right choices. There's no manual for single parenthood, especially when you're trying to be both mother and father to them. Isabella reached across the aisle and touched his arm gently. From what I've observed, you have incredible instincts. The way you handle Gabriel this morning, the way you talk about your own children, it's clear that you're exactly the father they need. Gabriel stirred in his carrier, making soft sounds that indicated he was waking up. Isabella immediately went into alert mode, checking his diaper and preparing a bottle. To her relief, the baby seemed content, looking around curiously at his surroundings without any signs of distress. "Hello, little one," David said softly, leaning over to greet Gabriel. "Are you ready for the rest of our adventure?" Gabriel's eyes focused on David's face, and a slow smile spread across the baby's features. It was one of those magical moments that reminded David why he'd fallen in love with fatherhood in the first place. "He remembers you," Isabella said in wonder. "Look how he's lighting up." "Babies have good memories for people who make them feel safe," David replied, gently stroking Gabriel's cheek with one finger. "Don't you, buddy?" As if in response, Gabriel cooed softly and reached toward David with tiny, grasping fingers. The moment was so tender that Isabella felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't entirely explain why. "Would you like to hold him for a while?" she asked. "I could use a break to stretch my legs." David carefully lifted Gabriel from his carrier, settling the baby against his chest in the same position that had worked so well that morning. Gabriel immediately relaxed, his head resting against David's shoulder as if he belonged there. Isabella stood and moved to the aisle, but instead of walking away, she found herself watching David with her son. There was something profoundly moving about seeing this strong, capable man cradling her baby with such gentle confidence. Gabriel looked so small and protected in David's arms, and the expression on David's face was one of pure contentment. "You're a natural," she said quietly. "I love this stage," David replied, his voice soft so as not to disturb Gabriel. "When they're old enough to interact, but still small enough to hold close. Marcus and Tyler went through this phase so quickly. Sometimes I wish I could have slowed down time and savored those moments more." "Do you ever think about having more children?" The question surprised David, and he considered it carefully before answering. "Sometimes. I think the boys would love having a sibling, and I'd love the chance to experience those early stages again. But realistically, it's hard enough providing for 2 children on my income. Adding another child to the equation would be irresponsible, no matter how much I might want it." Isabella nodded thoughtfully, understanding the practical considerations that governed David's decisions. Everything about his approach to life seemed to be filtered through the lens of what was best for his children, even when it meant sacrificing his own desires. "What about you?" David asked. "Is Gabriel your first?" "Yes, and honestly, I never thought I'd be a mother at all. It wasn't something I'd planned or prepared for. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I had no idea how to take care of a baby, no experience with children at all. What changed your mind about keeping him?" Isabella's expression grew distant as she remembered those early days of her pregnancy. "The first time I felt him move, I knew I couldn't give him up. It sounds cliché, but it was like this instant connection, this protective instinct I'd never experienced before. I realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wanted to face them with him." "That's exactly how I felt when the boys were born," David said. "That overwhelming sense of responsibility mixed with this incredible love. It changes everything about how you see the world." "Exactly. Suddenly, every decision becomes about what's best for them, not what's easiest or most convenient for you." Gabriel had drifted back to sleep in David's arms, his breathing deep and regular. The rhythmic sound was soothing, creating a peaceful bubble around them, despite the ambient noise of the aircraft. Where is Gabriel's father, if you don't mind me asking? David inquired gently. Isabella's jaw tightened slightly, and David immediately regretted the question. He's not in the picture. When he found out I was pregnant, he made it clear that fatherhood wasn't part of his plans. He offered to pay for an abortion and disappeared when I refused. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult to handle alone. It was, but in some ways, it was better to know his true character before Gabriel was born, rather than after. I'd rather raise my son alone than with someone who sees him as an inconvenience. David nodded, understanding the complex emotions involved in single parenthood by choice versus circumstance. Gabriel is lucky to have a mother who chose him over convenience. That kind of unconditional love is the most important thing you can give a child. The flight attendant approached. Their seats, offering warm towels and checking to see if they needed anything. David marveled again at the level of service in first class, the way staff anticipated passengers' needs before they were even expressed. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said as the flight attendant moved on to other passengers. "Of course. This morning, when Gabriel was crying and you offered to help, what made you do that? Most people would have just endured the noise or maybe complained to the flight crew." David thought about the question, trying to identify the specific moment when he decided to intervene. "I recognized the look on your face, that combination of exhaustion, frustration, and panic that every parent experiences when their child is inconsolable and they've run out of ideas. I remembered feeling exactly the same way countless times with Marcus and Tyler. But you were a stranger. You had no obligation to help. I didn't see it as an obligation. I saw it as an opportunity. You were struggling with something I had experience with, something I might be able to help resolve. It seemed natural to offer." Isabella studied his face as he spoke, noting the sincerity in his expression. That's not how most people think. Most people are too busy with their own concerns to notice when someone else needs help. Maybe I notice because I've been in that position so often myself. When you're a single parent, you become acutely aware of other people who might be struggling in similar ways. There's an unspoken understanding, a willingness to help because you know how much you've needed help yourself. Have you found that kind of support from other single parents? Sometimes. There's a dad at the boys' school, Jake, whose wife left when his daughter was 4. We've become friends, help each other out when we can. It's nice to have someone who understands the challenges without explanation. Isabella leaned back in her seat, processing their conversation. There was something about David's perspective that challenged her usual assumptions about human nature. In her world, relationships often felt transactional, based on mutual benefit rather than genuine care. David's willingness to help a stranger without expecting anything in return seemed almost foreign to her experience. "You mentioned that money can complicate relationships," David said, remembering her earlier comment. "What did you mean by that?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. "When people know you have significant resources, it changes how they interact with you. Every gesture feels calculated. Every relationship feels potentially motivated by what you might be able to provide. It becomes difficult to distinguish between genuine affection and opportunism." That sounds lonely. It can be. You start to question everyone's motives, even when they might be completely innocent. You become suspicious of kindness because you've learned that it often comes with strings attached. David shifted Gabriel to a more comfortable position, the baby's small weight warm against his chest. How do you handle that? How do you form real connections with people? Honestly, I'm not sure I do most of the time. I have business relationships, professional acquaintances, family obligations, but genuine friendships, romantic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial advantage, those are rare. That must make dating especially challenging. With a baby. Isabella laughed, though the sound held little humor. Dating isn't even on my radar right now. Between learning how to be a mother and managing work responsibilities, I barely have time to take care of myself, much less navigate the complications of romantic relationships. I understand that completely. The boys are my priority right now. Sometimes I think about the possibility of meeting someone eventually, but it would have to be someone who understood that they come first. Always. Do you think that's fair? To a potential partner, always being second to your children? David considered the question carefully. I think the right person would understand that loving my children completely actually makes me a better partner, not a worse one. Someone who could love them too, who could become part of our family rather than competing with it. That's a beautiful way to think about it. I hope Gabriel and I find that kind of person someday. As their conversation continued, both David and Isabella began to feel a connection that went beyond their initial meeting on the morning flight. There was an ease between them, a mutual understanding born of shared experiences and similar challenges. Despite their vastly different financial circumstances, they were both single parents, trying to navigate the complexities of raising children alone while maintaining their own identities and aspirations. The plane began its descent into Chicago, and David reluctantly prepared to return Gabriel to his carrier. The baby protested mildly at being moved, but settled quickly once he was secured in his familiar seat. "Thank you for sharing your space with me tonight," David said as they prepared for landing. "This has been one of the most comfortable flights I've ever taken." "Thank you for the company," Isabella replied, "and for being so wonderful with Gabriel. I don't know what I would have done without your help today." As they disembarked in Chicago, David felt a strange reluctance to part ways with Isabella. Again, their conversations had been among the most meaningful he'd had with another adult in months, and he found himself hoping their paths would cross again soon. "I meant what I said about staying in touch," Isabella said as they walked through the terminal. "I'd love to hear how your job interview turns out." "I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything," David promised, pulling out his phone to save her contact information properly. They parted ways at the baggage claim area, Isabella heading toward the luxury car service pickup while David made his way to the economy parking shuttle. As he watched her disappear into the early morning darkness, David found himself wondering about the elegant woman who could afford first-class upgrades and private car services, but chose to spend her evening talking with a construction worker about the challenges of single parenthood. The drive home through Chicago's empty pre-dawn streets gave David time to process the events of the past 24 hours. The job interview that had brought him to Seattle felt like the beginning of something important, but his encounters with Isabella felt equally significant in a way he couldn't quite define. As he quietly let himself into the apartment, David could hear the soft sounds of his boys sleeping in their shared bedroom. Mrs. Rodriguez had left a note on the kitchen table, reporting that both children had been perfect angels and were excited about hearing how Daddy's trip had gone. David stood in the doorway of the boys' room for a moment, watching Marcus and Tyler sleep peacefully in their twin beds. Marcus had one arm thrown protectively toward his brother's bed, even in sleep, maintaining his role as the responsible older twin. Tyler clutched his stuffed elephant close, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as if he were having pleasant dreams. The sight of his sleeping children filled David with renewed determination. Whatever opportunities lay ahead, whatever changes might come, his primary focus would always be providing them with the security and love they deserved. The chance encounter with Isabella had reminded him that he was capable of more than just surviving. He was capable of thriving, of making connections, of being the kind of person others turn to in their moments of need. As David finally settled, Into his makeshift bed in the living room, he found himself thinking about Gabriel's peaceful sleep in his arms, Isabella's grateful smile, and the unexpected gift of genuine conversation with someone who understood his challenges. Whatever came next, he felt more hopeful about the future than he had in months. The phone call would come tomorrow afternoon, he told himself as he drifted off to sleep. Jameson Construction would offer him the position, and he could begin planning the next chapter of their lives. But even if the job didn't materialize, something important had shifted during his trip to Seattle. He'd been reminded of his own worth, his capacity for kindness, and his ability to make a positive difference in other people's lives. Those realizations felt like gifts as valuable as any job opportunity, reminders that sometimes the most important journeys weren't about reaching destinations, but about discovering who you were along the way. David's phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. the following Tuesday, jarring him from his concentration as he reviewed blueprints at the construction site. The number on the display made his heart skip a beat. Jameson Construction. This was the call he'd been both anticipating and dreading for the past week. "David Chen speaking," he answered, stepping away from the noise of heavy machinery. "Mr. Chen, this is Rebecca Martinez from Jameson Construction. I'm calling with wonderful news. After careful consideration, we'd like to offer you the position of site supervisor. The compensation package we discussed, along with full benefits and relocation assistance, is still on the table." David felt his knees weaken with relief and excitement. "That's incredible news. Thank you so much for this opportunity. We're thrilled to have you join our team. We'll need to know your decision by Friday, and if you accept, we'd like you to start in 3 weeks. I'll be sending over all the paperwork and details via email within the hour." After ending the call, David stood in stunned silence for a moment before the reality hit him. He'd done it. He'd actually secured the job that would transform their lives. The salary increase alone would allow him to provide for Marcus and Tyler in ways he'd only dreamed about. Real health care, a decent apartment, savings for their future. It all suddenly seemed possible. His first instinct was to call Mrs. Rodriguez and share the news, but something made him hesitate. Instead, he found himself scrolling through his contacts until he reached Isabella's number. Throughout the week since their flights together, they'd exchanged several text messages, casual check-ins about how Gabriel was adjusting back home, and updates on David's job prospects. Their conversations had been brief but warm, and David had found himself looking forward to her messages more than he cared to admit. He typed quickly, "Got the job. They offered me the position with everything we discussed. I can't believe it's actually happening." Isabella's response came within minutes. "David, that's absolutely wonderful. I'm so happy for you and the boys. This is exactly what you deserve. Are you celebrating?" David looked around the construction site, still covered in dust and sweat from the morning's work. Not exactly sure how to celebrate yet, still processing that it's real. "Well, when you figure it out, you should do something special. This is a life-changing moment." "You're right. I should probably start with telling the boys, then figure out logistics for the move. If you need any advice about relocating with children, I'd be happy to help. I've moved more times than I care to count." David found himself smiling at her offer. "I might take you up on that. This is all pretty overwhelming. The best kind of overwhelming. You've earned this, David." That evening, David sat Marcus and Tyler down at their small kitchen table, trying to find the right words to explain the magnitude of what was about to change in their lives. "Boys, I have some important news to share with you," he began, watching their young faces grow serious with attention. "Do you remember how Daddy went to Seattle last week for a job interview?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "The important job that might help us have more money." "That's right. Well, they called today and offered me the position. It means we're going to move to Seattle, where I'll have a much better job and will be able to afford a nicer place to live. Tyler's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and concern. Move? Like leave Chicago, leave Mrs. Rodriguez and our friends? David felt his heart clench at the worry in his youngest son's voice. Yes, we'll be leaving Chicago. I know that's scary, and I know you'll miss our friends here. But we'll make new friends in Seattle, and this job will let me take much better care of you both. Marcus, ever the practical one, asked, when would we move? What about school? If we decide to accept the job, we'd move in about 3 weeks. You'd finish this school year here and start fresh in Seattle in the fall. You'd each have your own bedroom in our new apartment. Our own rooms? Tyler asked, his earlier worry momentarily forgotten. Really? Really? And we'd be able to afford things like better food, new clothes when you need them, and maybe even some of those activities you've wanted to try, like soccer or music lessons. The boys exchanged glances, their complex emotions playing across their faces. David could see the excitement about new possibilities, warring with anxiety about leaving everything familiar. Can we think about it? Marcus asked, displaying the mature consideration that sometimes surprised David. Of course, this is a big decision for our whole family. We'll talk about it as much as you need to. Over the next few days, David began the complex process of preparing for a potential cross-country move while maintaining his current job responsibilities. The logistics were daunting, finding housing in Seattle's competitive market, researching schools for the boys, arranging for the transfer of their belongings, and countless other details that came with relocating an entire family. During his lunch break on Thursday, David's phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. How are the moving plans coming along? I imagine there's a lot to organize. Completely overwhelming, he replied. Trying to find housing in Seattle from Chicago is proving more difficult than I expected. Everything decent is either too expensive or gets snapped up before I can even schedule a viewing. Isabella's response came quickly. I might be able to help with that. I have some connections in Seattle's real estate market. Would you like me to make a few calls? David hesitated before responding. Isabella had already been incredibly generous with the flight upgrade, and he didn't want to impose further on their new friendship. But the housing search was proving frustrating, and his time was running short. That's very kind of you to offer, but I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. David, you're not taking advantage of anything. Friends help friends, and finding good housing for your family is important. Let me make a few calls and see what I can find out. If you're sure it's not too much trouble, I'd really appreciate any guidance you can offer. Consider it done. Send me your budget range and what you're looking for in terms of location and amenities. That evening, as David was helping the boys with homework, Isabella called. Her timing was perfect. Marcus and Tyler were absorbed in a math worksheet, giving David a chance to step into the kitchen for privacy. I have some good news about housing options, Isabella said without preamble. I spoke with a friend who manages several apartment complexes in Seattle, and she has a 2-bedroom unit opening up next month in a great neighborhood. It's near excellent schools and would fit within your budget. David felt a surge of relief. That sounds perfect. How do I get in touch with her? I already gave her your information, and she's expecting your call tomorrow. But David, there's something else. I also found out about a 3-bedroom townhouse that just came on the market. It's in the same neighborhood, has a small yard, and would give the boys even more space. The rent is higher than your stated budget, but it's still very reasonable for Seattle standards. How much higher? David asked, though he suspected it would be beyond his reach. Isabella quoted a figure that was indeed more than David had planned to spend, though not impossibly so. It would be tight, but if the job pays what they promised, it might be manageable. Can I see both options when I come out for the final paperwork next week? Absolutely. I've arranged viewings for both properties. And David, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of putting in a good word for you with both landlords. Character references can make a big difference in competitive markets. David was quiet for a moment, touched by Isabella's thoughtfulness, but also slightly uncomfortable with the extent of her assistance. Isabella, you've already done so much. I don't know how to thank you properly. You don't need to thank me. Helping good people find stable housing for their children isn't a burden, it's a privilege. Besides, I want to make sure Gabriel and I have friends in Seattle when we visit. You visit Seattle regularly? More? Frequently than I'd like, actually. Business takes me there several times a year. It would be nice to have friends there instead of just business associates. After ending the call, David found himself reflecting on Isabella's continued generosity. Her willingness to help seemed genuine, but he couldn't shake a slight unease about accepting so much assistance from someone he'd only just met. His pride warred with his practical need for help, and the practical side was winning. The following week passed in a blur of arrangements and preparations. David gave notice at his current job, spoke with the boys' school about transferring records, and began the process of sorting through their belongings to decide what would make the journey to Seattle. Mrs. Rodriguez took the news of their impending move with grace, though David could see the sadness in her eyes at losing her unofficial grandchildren. "I'm happy for you, David," she said as they discussed the timeline. "This is the opportunity you've been working toward. But I'll miss these boys terribly. They'll miss you too. You've been such an important part of their lives, especially after Sarah died. I don't know how we would have managed without you. You would have managed because you're a good father, but I'm glad I could help. We'll stay in touch. The boys will want to call you and tell you about their new adventures." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'd like that very much." David's return trip to Seattle for final paperwork and house hunting was scheduled for the following Monday. Isabella had arranged the apartment, viewings for Tuesday morning, giving David time to complete his employment paperwork first. Sunday evening, as David packed for his second trip to Seattle in 3 weeks, his phone rang. Isabella's name appeared on the display, and he answered with a smile. "Last-minute preparations?" she asked. "Something like that. I keep feeling like I'm forgetting something important, but I can't figure out what." "That's normal. Moving across the country is a major undertaking. How are the boys handling everything?" "Better than I expected, actually. Marcus has been researching Seattle online, learning about the city and finding things to be excited about. Tyler is mostly focused on the promise of his own bedroom." Isabella laughed. "Those are both very reasonable priorities. Are you nervous about the apartment viewings tomorrow?" "A little. I want to make the right choice for the boys, but I also don't want to overextend financially." "Trust your instincts. You'll know the right place when you see it." Monday's flight to Seattle was vastly different from David's previous trips. Flying alone, in economy class, he had time to think about everything that was changing in their lives. The magnitude of the move was both exciting and terrifying. He was taking his children away from everything familiar, betting their future on his ability to succeed in a new job in a new city. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Typical Seattle weather that David was beginning to recognize. Isabella had offered to accompany him to the apartment viewings, claiming she wanted to provide a woman's perspective on the properties. David appreciated the support, especially since he'd never had to evaluate housing from the perspective of a single parent before. They met at a coffee shop near the first apartment complex, and David was struck again by Isabella's effortless elegance. Even dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, she carried herself with a confidence that seemed to command respect from everyone around her. "Ready to find your new home?" she asked, greeting him with a warm hug that felt natural despite their relatively brief acquaintance. The first apartment was in a well-maintained complex with good security and reasonable amenities. The two-bedroom unit was clean and functional, with adequate space for David and the boys. The neighborhood was safe, with parks nearby and highly rated, schools within walking distance. "It's nice," David said as they toured the space. "Practical," Isabella nodded, though he sensed some reservation in her response. "It would certainly meet your needs. The boys would be comfortable here." The second property was the townhouse Isabella had mentioned, and the difference was immediately apparent. The three-bedroom unit had character, hardwood floors, large windows that let in abundant natural light, and a small backyard where the boys could play safely. The extra space would allow for a home office where David could review work materials, and each child would have adequate privacy. "This feels more like a home," David admitted as they explored the property. "It does," Isabella agreed. "I can picture Marcus and Tyler being happy here." The rental agent, a professional woman named Patricia, who clearly knew Isabella well, provided details about the lease terms and answered David's questions about utilities and maintenance responsibilities. "The owner is very selective about tenants," Patricia explained, "but Isabella's recommendation carries significant weight. If you're interested, I can have the paperwork ready this afternoon." As they left the townhouse, David felt torn between practical considerations and genuine desire. The townhouse was clearly the better option for his family's happiness, but the higher rent would stretch his budget considerably. "What's your instinct telling you?" Isabella asked as they walked back to their cars. "Honestly, the townhouse feels right, but the responsible choice is probably the apartment." Isabella stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "David, can I share something with you?" "Of course." "I've watched you make decisions consistently based on what's best for your children, often at the expense of your own comfort or desires. That's admirable, but sometimes the choice that makes your family happiest is worth a small financial stretch. I just don't want to overcommit and end up struggling again. The boys have been through enough instability." "I understand that concern completely, but from what you've told me about the job offer, you'll be earning significantly more than you ever have before. The difference between the two rents is meaningful but not catastrophic." David considered her words as they stood outside the townhouse. The small yard visible through the gate, the additional space, the sense of true home, all of it appealed to him deeply. "There's something else," Isabella continued. "Patricia mentioned that the owner is looking for a long-term tenant, someone who will take care of the property and become part of the community. That kind of stability would be good for Marcus and Tyler." "You really think I should take the townhouse?" "I think you should trust yourself to make the choice that feels right for your family." That afternoon, David signed the lease for the townhouse. As he handed over the security deposit and first month's rent, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the commitment he was making, but Isabella's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the choice that made his family happiest was worth the stretch. Wednesday morning brought David's first day of orientation at Jameson Construction. The company's headquarters was an impressive facility with state-of-the-art equipment and a professional atmosphere that initially intimidated him. He was introduced to his new colleagues, most of whom seemed friendly but reserved, clearly taking the measure of the newcomer who would be supervising some of their projects. "David Chen, right?" said a man in his 40s with graying hair and a firm handshake. "I'm Robert Kim, Senior Project Manager. I'll be showing you the ropes for your first few weeks." "I appreciate that. I'm eager to learn how things work." Here. Robert's smile was polite but cool. I'm sure you are. I have to admit, we were all a bit surprised when management hired someone from outside the company for this position. Several of us had been hoping for promotion opportunities. David felt his stomach tighten. I understand that must be disappointing. I hope I can prove that I'll be a valuable addition to the team. I'm sure you will, Robert replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. The orientation continued with tours of active construction sites, meetings with department heads, and reviews of current projects. David absorbed information rapidly, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. By the end of the day, he felt cautiously optimistic about his ability to succeed in this new environment. However, the undercurrent of resentment from some colleagues was unmistakable. During a lunch break, David overheard a conversation between two project managers that clearly referenced his hiring. "I don't understand what makes this guy so special," one was saying. "Jake's been with the company for 8 years, knows every aspect of our operations, and gets passed over for some outsider. Management must see something we don't," the other replied diplomatically, "or they made a political hire for reasons we don't understand." David pretended not to hear, but the words stung. He'd known that joining an established team wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't anticipated the level of resistance he was encountering. That evening, David called Isabella to update her on his first day and discuss his concerns about team dynamics. "It sounds like typical workplace politics," she said, after listening to his account. "Change makes people uncomfortable, especially when they feel their own advancement has been affected. I just want to do good work and prove that I belong there, but it's hard when people are looking for reasons to see you fail. The best response to skepticism is consistent performance. Focus on doing excellent work, treating everyone with respect, and letting your results speak for themselves. That's what I'm planning to do. It's just more challenging than I expected. Most worthwhile things are. But David, remember that they hired you for a reason. Trust in your abilities and give yourself time to find your footing." Isabella's encouragement bolstered David's confidence, but the next few days continued to present challenges. During a team meeting about a complex commercial project, Robert questioned several of David's suggestions in front of the entire group. "I'm not sure that approach would work with our established protocols," Robert said, after David proposed a modification to the construction timeline. "We've been doing things a certain way for years because it works." "I understand the value of proven methods," David replied calmly. "But sometimes fresh perspectives can identify efficiencies that get overlooked when you're too close to a process." "Fresh perspectives are valuable," agreed Jennifer Walsh, the project director. "David, can you explain your reasoning in more detail?" David outlined his proposed changes, drawing on his years of hands-on experience to explain how slight modifications to the sequencing could save both time and money. As he spoke, he noticed several team members leaning forward with interest, though Robert's expression remained skeptical. "It's an interesting idea," Jennifer said when David finished. "Let's run some numbers and see how it would affect the overall timeline." After the meeting, Robert approached David privately. "Look, I'm sure you have good intentions, but jumping in with suggestions when you've been here less than a week might not be the best strategy." "I appreciate the advice," David replied diplomatically. "But if I see opportunities to improve our processes, isn't that part of what I was hired to do? Just be careful about pushing too hard too fast. People don't like feeling like their experience is being dismissed." David nodded, understanding the warning implicit in Robert's words. He was walking a delicate line between proving his value and alienating his colleagues. That weekend, David flew back to Chicago to begin the final stages of their move. The Boys were excited about the adventure ahead, but David could see underlying anxiety in their behavior. Marcus had become even more protective of Tyler, while Tyler had regressed slightly in his independence, asking for David's help with tasks he normally handled alone. "Are you scared about moving, buddy?" David asked Tyler as they packed toys. In the shared bedroom, Tyler nodded solemnly. "What if the kids in Seattle don't like us? What if we can't find new friends?" "That's a very normal worry," David said, sitting down on Tyler's bed and pulling his son close. "When I was your age, my family moved from one city to another, and I was scared about the exact same things." "Really? What happened?" "Well, it took some time, but I did make new friends. And you know what I learned? Most kids want to be friendly if you give them a chance. The hardest part is just being brave enough to introduce yourself." Marcus looked up from his packing. "Dad, what if you don't like your new job? What if we have to move again?" "Duh." David's heart ached at the worry in his eldest son's voice. "Marcus, that's a very thoughtful question. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I can promise that I'll work very hard to make this move successful for all of us. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together as a family." The last week in Chicago passed in a whirlwind of packing, goodbyes, and final arrangements. Mrs. Rodriguez helped with the boys, while David handled logistics, and her presence provided stability during the chaos of preparation. On their final evening in the apartment, David found himself standing in the empty living room where he'd slept for the past 3 years, where he'd comforted crying children and celebrated small victories. The space held so many memories, both difficult and joyful, that leaving felt like closing an important chapter of their lives. "Second thoughts?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, joining him in the empty room. "More like appreciation for what this place has meant to us. It wasn't much, but it was home when we needed it most. And now you're ready for something bigger and better. That's how life should work. You grow, you change, you move toward better opportunities. I hope the boys see it that way eventually. They will. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when they feel loved and secure." The moving truck arrived early Monday morning, and David spent the day supervising the loading of their belongings while trying to keep Marcus and Tyler entertained and calm. By evening, everything they owned was packed and ready for the journey west. Their flight to Seattle was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and David had arranged for them to stay in a hotel near their new townhouse for the first few nights while their belongings were delivered and they could begin settling in. As their plane lifted off from O'Hare, David looked down at the Chicago skyline, shrinking below them. Beside him, Marcus and Tyler pressed their faces to the window, watching their former home disappear into the distance. "Are you ready for this adventure?" David asked, reaching over to squeeze both boys' hands. "I think so," Marcus replied seriously. "It's scary but exciting." "That's exactly how I feel," David said, scared and excited at the same time. Tyler looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Daddy, what if we don't like it in Seattle?" "Then we'll figure out how to make it better. But Tyler, I have a feeling we're going to love our new life." As the plane climbed higher into the sky, David felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for what they were leaving behind, anxiety about the challenges ahead, and hope for the opportunities that awaited them. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and that knowledge gave him the courage to embrace the uncertainty of their new beginning. 3 months into their new life in Seattle, David felt like he was finally finding his rhythm. The boys had adjusted better than expected. Marcus had joined the school's robotics club, and Tyler had made fast friends with a neighbor boy who shared his love of storytelling. The townhouse had become a true home, filled with laughter and the comfortable chaos of family life. At Jameson Construction, David's initial projects had been successful, earning grudging respect from some colleagues while others remained skeptical of his methods. His hands-on approach and willingness to work alongside crews had impressed the field workers, even if some managers questioned his unconventional style. Isabella had become a regular part of their lives, visiting Seattle every few weeks for what she described as business meetings. Gabriel had grown into an alert, happy baby who still lit up whenever David held him. The friendship between David and Isabella had deepened naturally, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and an easy compatibility that surprised them both. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, David was reviewing site plans in his office when his phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Emergency in Seattle. Flight lands at 6 p.m. Can you meet me at the airport? Something's happened with Gabriel." David's blood ran cold. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, stopping only to tell his supervisor he had a family emergency. The drive to SeaTac Airport felt endless as worst-case scenarios raced through his mind. Isabella emerged from the arrival gate looking harried and exhausted, Gabriel fussing in his carrier. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. "What happened?" David asked, immediately taking Gabriel's carrier to give Isabella's arms a break. "He's been sick since yesterday. High fever, won't eat, crying constantly. My pediatrician in Los Angeles said it might be serious and recommended I bring him to Seattle Children's Hospital. They have specialists there." David's heart clenched at the worry in her voice. Gabriel felt warm against his chest, his tiny face flushed with fever. "Let's get him to the hospital right now." The emergency room at Seattle Children's Hospital was crowded and chaotic, but Isabella's name seemed to carry weight. They were expedited through triage and seen by a pediatric specialist within an hour, remarkably fast for an emergency room. Dr. Sarah Kim examined Gabriel thoroughly, while Isabella answered detailed questions about his symptoms and medical history. David held Gabriel's tiny hand during the examination, offering what comfort he could to the distressed infant. "I want to run some tests," Dr. Kim said after completing her evaluation. His symptoms could indicate several different conditions, ranging from mild to serious. "I'd like to admit him for observation and monitoring." Isabella's face went pale. "Admit him? How serious are we talking? Let's not jump to conclusions until we have test results, but I want to be cautious with an infant this young. The next 24 hours will tell us a lot." As they settled into Gabriel's hospital room, Isabella seemed to crumble. The composed, confident woman David knew disappeared, replaced by a terrified first-time mother facing her worst nightmare. "I should have brought him in sooner," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought it was just a regular cold. What if I waited too long? What if something happens to him because I didn't act fast enough?" David pulled a chair close to her bedside vigil and took her hands in his. "Isabella, you did everything right. You noticed he was sick. You consulted your doctor. You brought him here when advised. You're being the mother Gabriel needs." "I don't know how to do this," she sobbed. "I've never been so scared in my life. He's so tiny, so helpless. I can't bear the thought of losing him." "You're not going to lose him," David said firmly, though his own heart was heavy with worry. For the baby who had become so precious to him. Gabriel is strong, and he has the best medical care available. We'll get through this together. Over the next 18 hours, David never left Isabella's side. He called Mrs. Kim from next door to watch Marcus and Tyler, explaining that a friend's baby was in the hospital, and he needed to provide support. The boys, with their natural empathy, immediately understood and sent drawings for Gabriel that David promised to deliver. Hospital vigils have a way of stripping away pretense and revealing people's true characters. As they sat together through the long night, taking turns holding Gabriel during his restless moments and supporting each other through waves of anxiety, David saw sides of Isabella she'd never shown before. "I need to tell you something," Isabella said during one of Gabriel's brief, peaceful moments around 3 a.m. Something I should have shared a long time ago. What is it? Isabella took a shaky breath. My full name is Isabella Santos Morales. My family owns Morales Energy Corporation. We're one of the largest independent oil companies in North America. David stared at her, processing this information. You're saying you're wealthy, very wealthy. My family has been in the oil business for 3 generations. The company is worth several $billion, and I'm set to inherit a significant portion of it. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense. The first-class upgrades, the real estate connections, the ease with which she'd arranged their housing, the deference she received from hospital staff. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked quietly. Because I wanted you to know me as Isabella, not as an heiress. I wanted our friendship to be real, based on who we are as people, not what I could provide or what you might want from me. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline without really seeing it. All this time, you've been helping us, and I thought you were just being kind. But you've been managing us, haven't you? The job recommendation, the housing connections, even bringing Gabriel to this specific hospital. David, please don't think of it that way. How should I think of it? He turned to face her, pain and confusion evident in his voice. You've been orchestrating our lives from behind the scenes. The job at Jameson, did you have something to do with that too? Isabella's silence was answer enough. Oh my God, David said, running his hands through his hair. The whole thing was arranged. I didn't get that job on my merit. I got it because you pulled strings. That's not true, Isabella said urgently. You got the job because you're qualified and capable. I may have made sure your application got proper consideration, but they chose you based on your abilities. How can I believe that? How can I believe any of this has been real? Their argument was interrupted by Gabriel's crying. David instinctively moved to comfort the baby, but Isabella picked him up first, her own tears mixing with her attempts to soothe her son. Everything I've felt for you and your boys has been real, she said through her tears. My wealth doesn't change the fact that you helped a stranger on an airplane, that you've been a wonderful friend, that Gabriel adores you, that I've never met anyone as genuine and kind as you are. But it changes everything else, David replied. It changes the power dynamic between us. It changes the meaning of every gesture, every offer of help. I can't tell what's real friendship and what's charity. Dr. Kim entered the room with test results, interrupting their tense conversation. I have good news, she announced. Gabriel has a minor respiratory infection that's responding well to treatment. His fever is breaking, and all the serious conditions we were concerned about have been ruled out. The relief was overwhelming. Isabella clutched Gabriel close, sobbing with gratitude, while David felt his own eyes fill with tears. Whatever their personal complications, the baby's health was what mattered most. He'll need to stay for another day of observation and IV antibiotics, Dr. Kim continued, but he should make a full recovery with no lasting effects. As the doctor left, Isabella and David looked at each other across the hospital room, the weight of their earlier conversation hanging between them despite their shared relief about Gabriel's prognosis. I need some air, David said quietly. I'll be back in a few minutes. David found himself in the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational space designed for quiet reflection. He wasn't particularly religious, but he needed somewhere peaceful to process everything that had happened. The past few hours had been an emotional whirlwind. Gabriel's illness had terrified him almost as much as it had Isabella, making him realize how deeply attached he'd become to both mother and child. But the revelation about Isabella's wealth had shattered his understanding of their relationship and his own recent success. Had anything been real? His job performance, his growing confidence, his sense that he was finally providing properly for his boys, All of it now felt tainted by the possibility that it had been orchestrated by someone with unlimited resources and hidden agendas. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Is baby Gabriel okay? Tyler and I are worried about him." David smiled despite his turmoil. His boys had such good hearts, immediately concerned about a baby they'd only met a few times. He typed back, "Gabriel is going to be fine. He's getting better medicine and should be home soon." "Good! Tyler wants to give him our extra teddy bear when he's better." The simple gesture of kindness from his children reminded David of what truly mattered. Whatever complications existed in his relationship with Isabella, Gabriel was an innocent baby who had captured all their hearts. The child's recovery was cause for celebration, regardless of other concerns. David returned to the hospital room to find Isabella gently rocking Gabriel, who appeared more alert and comfortable than he had in days. The baby's fever had broken and his breathing was easier. "He looks so much better," David observed, pulling his chair closer to Isabella's bedside seat. "The antibiotics are working. Dr. Kim says we might be able to go home tomorrow afternoon if he continues improving at this rate." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both focused on Gabriel's peaceful recovery. Finally, Isabella spoke. "David, I need you to understand something. Yes, I used my connections to help you get consideration for the job at Jameson. But I didn't create your qualifications, your experience, or your work ethic. I didn't make you the kind of person who calms crying babies or raises remarkable children or treats everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life." David listened without responding, still processing his feelings about her intervention. "I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want things from me," Isabella continued. "Business partnerships, social connections, romantic relationships, they all come with expectations about what I can provide financially. When I met you on that airplane, you helped me without knowing anything about my background. That was the first genuine kindness I'd experienced in years." "I understand why you didn't tell me initially," David said slowly. "But as our friendship developed, as you started helping with major life decisions, I deserve to know the full truth about who you are and what you were doing. You're absolutely right. I should have told you sooner. I was selfish. I wanted to preserve the one relationship in my life that felt completely authentic." Gabriel stirred in Isabella's arms, making soft sounds that indicated he was waking up. When his eyes opened, they were clearer and more alert than they'd been since his illness began. "Hey there, little man," David said softly, reaching over to stroke Gabriel's cheek. "Feeling better?" To their delight, Gabriel smiled, a genuine, happy expression that indicated he was truly on the mend. The sight of his recovery brought fresh tears to both adults' eyes. "He's going to be okay," Isabella whispered, as much to herself as to David. "Yes, he is. And so are we, all of us." Isabella looked at David with hope and uncertainty. "Does that mean you can forgive me for not being completely honest?" David considered the question carefully. "I'm hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth, and I'm confused about what my job success really means. But Isabella, watching you these past 24 hours, seeing how much you love Gabriel, remembering all the genuine moments we've shared, I don't think I can walk away from this friendship. What do you need from me to rebuild that trust? Complete honesty going forward. No more managing situations from behind the scenes without my knowledge. If you want to help with something, ask me directly and let me make informed decisions." "I can promise you that," Isabella said without hesitation. Gabriel chose that moment to reach toward David with tiny grasping fingers, making soft cooing sounds that clearly indicated he wanted to be held. David carefully took the baby from Isabella's arms, marveling at how much stronger and more alert Gabriel seemed compared to just hours earlier. "I think he missed you," Isabella observed with a small smile. "I missed him too, more than I realized until he was sick. David, can I ask you something?" Of course. These past few months, getting to know you and your boys, being part of your lives, it's been the happiest I've ever been. Not because of anything you've done for me, but because of who you are, who Marcus and Tyler are. You've given me something I never thought I'd have, a real family. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. You've given us something precious too. Gabriel has brought so much joy to our lives, and your friendship has meant more to me than you know. Where do we go from here? David looked down at Gabriel, who had fallen asleep against his chest with the peaceful trust that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. I think we take it one day at a time. We be honest with each other. We figure out how to maintain our friendship while respecting the complexities of our different circumstances. Can you still accept help from me when you need it? Not as charity, but as support between friends. That's going to be the challenging part, David admitted. My pride wants to handle everything independently. But watching Gabriel tonight, seeing how much he means to all of us, I realize that sometimes accepting help isn't about weakness, it's about love. The next morning brought Gabriel's full recovery and clearance to leave the hospital. As they prepared for discharge, David made a decision that surprised even himself. Isabella, I want you to meet Marcus and Tyler properly, not just as the nice lady from the airplane, but as Gabriel's mother and our friend. They deserve to know the full truth about who you are in our lives. Isabella's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. Are you sure? That's a big step. Yes, I'm sure, but we do it honestly, age-appropriately, and without overwhelming them with details about your wealth. They should know you as the person who's become important to our family. That afternoon, David sat his boys down in their living room while Isabella and Gabriel visited. He explained that Miss Isabella had become a very special friend, that baby Gabriel meant a lot to all of them, and that they were going to be spending more time together as an extended family of sorts. Like Mrs. Rodriguez was in Chicago? Tyler asked, immediately grasping the concept. Something like that, but different because Gabriel is a baby and needs different kinds of help. Marcus, with his usual perceptiveness, asked, Dad, do you like Miss Isabella the way you liked Mom? The question caught David off guard, forcing him to examine feelings he hadn't fully acknowledged. I care about Miss Isabella very much, and I care about Gabriel, but that's different from how I felt about your mom. Your mom will always be special and irreplaceable. But you could care about Miss Isabella too, Tyler asked with the innocent directness of childhood. Yes, David said after a moment of consideration. I think I could. When Isabella arrived with Gabriel, the boys greeted them both with enthusiasm, immediately showing Gabriel the teddy bear they'd selected as a get-well gift. The baby's delighted response to the soft toy and his obvious recognition of the boys melted Isabella's heart. We were worried about Gabriel, Marcus explained seriously. Dad said he was sick and had to go to the hospital. He's much better. Now, thanks to good doctors and good friends like you, Isabella replied, touched by their concern. As the afternoon progressed, David watched Isabella interact with his children and felt something shift in his understanding of their relationship. Her wealth was a fact they'd have to navigate, but it didn't define who she was as a person or diminish the genuine affection that had grown between them all. That evening, after Isabella and Gabriel had returned to their hotel, David found himself reflecting on everything that had changed in the past few days. The crisis of Gabriel's illness had stripped away pretense and revealed the depth of feeling that connected their two families. His phone rang, displaying Isabella's name. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked without preamble. Honestly, overwhelmed but hopeful. Today felt like a new beginning. It did for me too. David, I want you to know that whatever happens between us personally, I'll always be grateful for the friendship you've given me and the love you've shown Gabriel. Isabella, there's something I need to tell you too. What's that? When Gabriel was sick, when I thought we might lose him, I realized that I love that little boy like he's my own son. And I love you, not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are when you're just being yourself. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that David wondered if the call had been dropped. "Isabella, are you there?" "I'm here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, David. I love Marcus and Tyler. I want us to be a real family, if you think that's possible, despite all the complications." "I think," David said, slowly, "that love is worth figuring out the complications." 2 weeks later, David stood before the executive board at Jameson Construction, presenting the results of his most challenging project to date. The commercial development had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, using innovative techniques that several colleagues had initially resisted. "Outstanding work, David," said the company president as the presentation concluded. "This is exactly the kind of leadership and innovation we hoped to see when we hired you." Robert Kim, who had been David's most persistent skeptic, approached him after the meeting. "I owe you an apology," he said straightforwardly. "I questioned your methods and your qualifications, but your results speak for themselves. You've earned your place here." "Thank you, Robert. That means a lot coming from you. I'd like to collaborate on the next major project, if you're open to it. I think we could learn from each other." David smiled, feeling a sense of professional validation he'd never experienced before. "I'd welcome that partnership." As he drove home that evening, David reflected on how much had changed since that first airplane flight months earlier. The job he'd worried was undeserved had become a platform for genuine achievement. The friendship that had begun with helping a crying baby had evolved into a love that encompassed their entire extended family. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Gabriel took his first steps today. Can't wait to show you and the boys." David smiled, imagining Marcus and Tyler's excitement at seeing Gabriel's milestone. Their lives had become beautifully intertwined in ways he never could have predicted. When he arrived home, he found his boys working on homework at the kitchen table, their concentration serious and focused. Tyler looked up as David entered. "Dad, when are Miss Isabella and Gabriel coming to visit again?" "This weekend." "Why?" "Because Marcus and I want to teach Gabriel how to play our favorite game." "What game is that?" Tyler grinned. "The one where we all hug at the same time. Gabriel's too little to hug back yet, but he can be in the middle." David's heart swelled with love for his children's generous spirits and their instinctive inclusion of Gabriel in their family rituals. "That sounds like the perfect game for all of us," he said, pulling both boys into exactly the kind of group hug Tyler had described. That night, as David tucked his sons into their separate bedrooms in the townhouse that had become their true home, he reflected on the unpredictable journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple act of kindness on an airplane had set in motion a series of events that transformed their lives in ways both challenging and wonderful. "Dad?" Marcus called from his bed as David was about to leave the room. "Yes, buddy?" "Are you happy here in Seattle?" David considered the question, thinking about his job success, their comfortable home, the friends they'd made, and the love that had grown between their family and Isabella and Gabriel. "Yes, Marcus. I'm very happy here. Are you?" "I think so. I miss Chicago sometimes, but I like our life here, and I really like having Gabriel around. He's like the little brother Tyler, and I never had." "What do you think about Miss Isabella?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and David could almost hear him thinking, "I think she makes you smile more than you used to, and she's really good at taking care of Gabriel. Tyler says she should be part of our family." "What do you think about that idea?" "I think Tyler's right. We have room for more people to love." David kissed his son's forehead, marveling at the wisdom and emotional intelligence his 8-year-old possessed. "I love you, Marcus. Sweet dreams." "Love you too, Dad." As David settled into his own bed, he found himself thinking about the future with optimism and excitement rather than anxiety and uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but he would face them with the support of people who loved him for exactly who he was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.